Welcome. Just so excited and grateful to you for showing up tonight to talk about the transformative power of somatics for abolition and grassroots organising. Just to repeat again, I'm China and I lead Healing Justice London's Deaths by Welfare project. And I am just genuinely joyful to be chairing this conversation today and just so blown away by how many of you are joining us tonight. It's just, yeah, we're all super excited about this. It's also kind of funny that I've been asked to chair this session because I'm quite new to somatics and I'm just kind of cautiously dipping my toes in, maybe one toe. And my journey so far started with apprehension, I'm going to be honest, and then it shifted maybe to skepticism. And now I think I'm in like genuine curiosity mode. And so when Farzana suggested I chair this session, I was like, me, really? But on her suggestion, I'll be bringing this curious energy to chairing this session. And much of this curiosity about somatics for me comes from being blessed to be part of ongoing conversations with our wonderful speakers today. And our speakers are just three absolutely fierce, powerhouse, joyous human beings. So it's just my real honor to introduce them. So first I'm going to introduce Marai Larasi, who is a Black, African, Caribbean, British feminist advocate, community organiser and consultant who has worked in social justice for over 27 years. Much of her work has focused on ending violence against Black, global majority women and girls. Till May 2019, Marai was the Executive Director of IMCAN UK and has also been co-chair of the End Violence Against Women Coalition UK. Her work has included and been framed by alliances with other Black, global majority and Indigenous feminist activists and practitioners in diverse contexts. In her current practice, she works across a number of spheres and sectors, providing strategic policy, practice and training support around decoloniality, intersectionality, racial justice and ending violence against women and girls. She's also a member of Project Talawa, an emerging Black feminist collective who are reimagining and building a resourcing and community initiative. And next I'm going to introduce Staci Haines. So Staci is the author of The Politics of Trauma, Somatics, Healing and Social Justice. She has been experimenting at the intersections of personal and social transformation for the last 25 years. And through the work of somatics, trauma healing, embodied leadership and transformative justice. And she's the co-founder and former director of Generative Somatics, a multiracial social justice organisation bringing somatics to social and climate justice leaders, organisations and alliances. So Staci's a senior teacher in the field of somatics and designs and leads programmes in somatics and trauma and somatics and social justice, as well as leading teacher training programmes. She has a somatic coaching practice that primarily serves social movement leaders and trauma and violence survivors. And lastly, Staci is also the founder of Generation 5, which is a social justice organisation whose mission is to end the sexual abuse of children within 5 generations through survivor leadership and transformative justice approaches. And last, but by no means least, Farzana Khan is the Executive Director and co-founder at Healing Justice London. And my boss, I always joke, and her practice works on building community health, repair and self-transformation rooted in disability justice, survivor work and trauma-informed practice, working with communities of colour and other marginalised and underrepresented groups. Farzana has over 10 years of background in youth and community work, particularly focused on arts-based education projects, both in the UK and internationally. She's also the former creative and strategic director at Voices That Shake, bringing together young people, artists and campaigners to develop creative responses to social injustice. And she ran the Working at Platform London, a climate and social justice organisation working across arts, education, research and activism. And as if that's not enough, Farzana is also a fellow at the International Curatorial Forum, and a recent curatorial practice and art includes launching the Black Cultural activism map with the Stuart Hall Foundation, as well as All Water Has Perfect Memory, writing on climate and gender justice and generational trauma and memory. Wow, so you can see what I mean by 3 just incredible speakers. And now I'm going to pass to Farzana, who's going to give us a bit of a framing for the event today.
Thank you, China, and also thank you to the incredible Healing Justice team, and also Rachel and Sumaya, who are speaking, who are doing our BSL today. I'm actually really emotional because I think I personally have waited a long time to be in conversation. Wow, I'm really emotional to have this conversation with our movements, with Staci and Marai and China, with our team. So it feels like we're here, and I think saying we're here is important given the genocidal ways our governments are treating us. So I want to name that we're here, and that's a testament to our resilience and the continuums of incredible resistance that we sit amongst. I'm also super tender today because for some of you, you'll be aware that there was a report, an article in the Metro that was released talking about just the phenomenal public health failure and deaths to Black and other racialized communities. And Alex has just put it into the chat. And what it made me really feel into is, and who I want to bring into the room is Dr. Aziza Johnson, someone who's moved with us at Healing Justice London, someone who was stolen from us, and someone whose scholarship and practice and being was so much about keeping us well and safe, racialized bodies, Black bodies, Muslim bodies, securitized bodies, surveilled bodies. And so I want to bring Aziza into the space and honor and dedicate this session to the work we were trying to do together that is here. And I actually want to begin with a piece that I wrote after a conversation with Aziza, which speaks to why we're here. This piece I wrote about 6 years ago as an essay for a map for liberatory public health. And it's called A Litany Survival, in homage to Audre Lorde, but also that we need a litany for survival. So it's called A Litany for Survival, Losing Chronic Unsustainability and Visioning Liberatory Health. At dinner, Aziza takes out tablet after tablet and places it beside her plate. We fill our stomachs with things one should not: politics, philosophy, religion. And really, there are only a few things on the menu that we can consume. We push away and around, mentioning loss, defeat, heartbreak, death, like veg on a plate. After taking the first pill, Aziza says it: in essence, my body is trying to kill me. 6 months prior, doctors at the Royal London Hospital tower over my body. After numerous examinations, lead them to diagnose me with undiagnosis. Ms. Khan, we don't know why it happened or what caused it. It's just sometimes these things happen to women. I'm struck by how I've never heard of things that just happen to men, how resources, privilege, institutional protection are put towards making sure things don't happen to men. And this is not separate to the fact that most of the people on the council estate I grew up in always had someone surviving cancer, or that years of frontline youth and community work taught me a fluency in suicide and loss, or that the last 3 times I'd visited my father in resus, laying in the hospital bed beside him was a Black or brown youth stabbed. Habitual and intimate and structural bereavement, not coincidences, only commonplace amongst the vulnerable communities in Britain, reminding those of us regulated to the margins, loss is not only continuous, but also cumulative. How you are made vulnerable is how you are made vulnerable. When poverty leads to sickness or institutionalized racialized violence, this also leads to trauma. It follows then public health institutions by proximity to the state also made you vulnerable to state harm and violence. I'm going to pause here, but really to kind of call in the or to recognize that while we're trying to do this work at Healing Justice, or why we arrived at the somatics as a political strategy, is really to offer each other life and to find ways. We know oppression, we know racism, we know all the different isms are anti-life, that they take away life, but not only do they lead to fatalities, they also steal away our capacity to be living. They steal away our capacity to access connection and joy and love and intimacy and pleasure. And, you know, I shared this the other day, that I think a lot about temporal justice, because we have what this work in somatics has taught me, what Staci's work, Marai's work, so many of in the call work has taught me, is that sometimes we don't survive, and Toni Morrison speaks to that, like sometimes in oppression we don't survive, but when we do survive, how do we make that rich? How do we make that abundant? How do we make that beautiful? And how do we make it the best thing that we could offer each other? And in that we get to live our most freest selves, because we're constantly navigating being unfree. And so when we're coming to the work of somatics, we're finding a political strategy, a social strategy to come together, to be together and offer each other more life. And what we're exploring at HJL, how we rehearse and practice liberation and freedom together. I really want to pause there and actually speak to, firstly, Marai's, your work in co-founding IMCAN, and how Healing Justice sits in the legacy of the work around ending gender-based violence and multiple forms of violence. And so we stand in the legacy, in the context of that resistance and that response that we need from community work. And then also to recognize, Staci, your life, your work has in some ways saved my life too. Your incredible survivor work that gave context, political context, to what we're navigating. It has been an educative tool, has been practice, and has been phenomenal for bringing together communities that I want to organize with, to fight for, and to be led by. And so we bring you into this space as someone who demonstrates great allyship, but not only demonstrates great allyship, includes us and offers us lots of different strategies to make our movements robust and to take us beyond just surviving. And both Marai and you do that. So it's truly an honor to be sharing this space for you. I'm going to pause here. It's a lot of information. I'm super emotional, and I'm going to hand back to China.
Thank you so much, Farzana. And I think that sets the scene really well for us perhaps to start to hear a little bit more about our speakers' journeys into somatics and social justice work. And I'm going to ask you, you know, what drew you and compelled you to do work at these intersections? What have been your entry points? So Marai, would you like to start us off? How did you get into this work?
I'll give it a go. So thanks, China. Farzana, I'm feeling super emotional. So thank you. So ancestral and warrior greetings, family. Thank you to Healing Justice London community family for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. So just a quick correction. So I held space at IMCAN, I was director there, but it was founded by some fierce women, many of whom, you know, like are less known than say someone like me. So just to acknowledge that. China, to your question, so in many ways, like you, I was just like, should this be me? So I'm bringing myself here as a student. I'd say I'm pretty early on in my conscious journey, while also feeling like this work is ancestral recall. So I feel like part of what is happening for me is a remembering and a re-engagement with that which has been buried deep in my psyche. So I want to recognize the way that my body has been teaching me. I want to kind of shout out to the dancers, the drummers, the body warriors, the plant medicine healers, the dreamers, the teachers, the time travelers, all of whom have continued to do this work, even though it might not, you know, like we might not think of that work in the formal somatic space. In terms of the conscious engagement with this work, I did a session a few years ago with a kick-ass, amazing sister called Nkemndefo. And I was really in that space able to understand how my own survival strategies, to understand a bit more about them, to understand what, like a bit more about what's happening in my body, the way those survival strategies have served me. Yeah, so just to acknowledge that in a weird kind of way they have, but also the ways that they've harmed me and the ways that I've caused harm as a result of kind of being in this space. So I really kind of saw how, like my practice, for example, of appeasing in a particular situation as a survival strategy could make me a really skilled negotiator sometimes with a civil servant, but not so great in a relationship, right? And then more recently, the Healing Justice London retreat with Staci really helped to ground me in a number of practices. A, work around centering, and B, just some beautiful stuff about responding to change. So Staci, I want to big you up again, because in the last few weeks, I would say that I've been moving through change, partly because of the practices that you supported us with during that retreat. So I think that's it from me for the moment, China. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Marai. And my God, I hear you on the appeasing. So thank you for naming that. Farzana, would you like to share with us how you got into this work?
Firstly, Marai, just yes to everything. I think it was for so many, there was always lots of different paths to it. I didn't realize one of the fundamental parts of this work was that when I was doing a lot of youth work, particularly in East London with young women of color, I ended up doing not youth work, I ended up doing a lot of survivor work. And I think that was a kind of key part of recognizing that while we could have, particularly in the context of the communities that I was part of, we needed alternative forms of supporting people to access like life in their own bodies. You'd often hear like everything hurts, or yes, you put the person in prison, but how do I feel safe in my body? And so actually really having a survivor-centered approach that actually now we would much more frequently talk about as an abolitionist approach as well, was like a key eye-opener of like, what does it mean for people to access safety in their body? What does it mean for us to feel well in our body? And actually surviving oppression continuously requires us to dismember, and sometimes that's completely appropriate. So no, there's zero judgment on that, but actually recognizing, and what Marai said is, how can we afford each other more life, especially people who have had that taken away. I think a key part of where somatics has been even more important or like prevalent in my work is in organizing, like recognizing that, when we're building movements, a lot of us are coming to movement work because we're so traumatized, because we've been hurt, because we've been injured, and then we reproduce a lot of those dynamics, and often they're not from ill intention, but they cut. And so how do we make our movements robust enough, sustainable enough? How do we get, skillful, to use your term, Staci, to be able to really become sustainable, and also to become, an ecosystem and appropriate. I've often found in, Marai, you were talking about change, and one of the things that I've really noticed in myself through doing a lot of somatic practices is my capacity not only to tolerate change has increased, but to tolerate growth. And we need to mass mobilize right now. Like, shit is real, and we can't stay small, we can't stay afraid. We need to organize with everyone that wants to, organize, and we're going to have different strategies, we're going to have complicated strategies, we're going to not always see eye to eye, but there is work to do. And how will we be able to do that together? And so for me, part of this work is really not only to politicize healing and health and look at the ways in which we can remember in the context of coloniality's dismemberment and the brutalizing of our bodies in racial capitalism, but also to be able to, there's a beautiful phrase which says, we in movements, we know how to come together, but we don't know how to move together. And that growing that muscle and practicing that muscle together so we don't atrophy, so we're more organized than the way that the right is, excites me. There's so much potential here, and we can do it. Like this is the task at hand, and we can do it. So this is where what I'm most excited and invigorated by in the potential of politicized somatics.
Yes, love it. I'm like head hurts from nodding. Just so powerful, Farzana. Thank you so much. And Staci, would you tell us about your journey into this work?
First of all, just thank you so much for having me. It's been amazing to partner with Farzana and HJL. And I feel so many yeses to both Marai, what you said, and Farzana, what you said about what's the draw and what's possible here. I think I'm going to start with, I grew up in the Rocky Mountains in the United States, and white and working class. And I'm also a survivor of child sexual abuse, and all those things deeply inform my lived experience and also how I was trying to navigate the world. And, I was also one of those kids who I hated things being unfair. I wanted them to not be unfair. I wanted them to be fair. And there was something about, Marai, you said something about remembering. My work in somatics feels so much like it was remembering too. Like the first place I started to train and I got to deepen in, I was like, oh no, something has always been here and now I'm remembering. And I think, I'm almost 30 years later in somatics now, and there is something so alive and dynamic and relevant to our time that keeps me in, just like I get kept in movement. But part of what drew me into what I would call it now is this interface between personal, collective, and structural transformation. Like those intersections are the intersections that I just feel so compelled by and passionate. But part of what drew me in is, as a young activist, I'd be sitting in meetings and I would go, oh, I so believe in what we're saying, but how we're being with each other and what it's like and how folks are treating each other. I'm like, this is not the world I want to live in. This is not at all the world I want to live in. And I don't think it's what we mean. And I didn't have whatever. I grew into this, as we all do, but I was like, how do we be different? How do we take what we ingested and all the ways we were hurt and how structural oppression traumatizes us? And how do we transform it together so we are being good to each other, so that we can have bold visions and be shoulder to shoulder in those visions, so that we can mess up with each other and then make it up with each other. So I just was like, how do we heal? How do we heal? And how does all that healing come back into movement space? And, Generation 5 was the first time that we really experimented with how do we do trauma healing and consciousness raising and organizing simultaneously? Because when working with ending the sexual abuse of children within 5 generations, with really going, how do we do transformative justice around child sexual abuse? I mean, I can't tell you how many stories we heard, thousands of stories. And how do we hear the stories, how there's be a space for politicization and healing? And how do we also build the collective embodied capacities to do TJ, to do transformative justice, to organize differently, to invite and elicit how powerful each other are, alongside of not denying any of the wounds. So these are the things that drew me in and keep me drawn in and keep me in the experiments. I just feel like learn from the experiment and next experiment, just make new mistakes and build on what happened before. So I think lastly, what I'll say is I want to thank so many of my teachers. I did not arrive here alone. I want to be fully in this life and pass on as much as I can. But I really want to thank Chandra Mohanty, Audre Lorde, big politicizing people in my life, and third wave feminism, Bell Hooks. I want to thank Mary Beth Krause, who helped to unpack class, because the classless society of the US is such a massive lie here. Spenta Kendawalla, who's been a big partner, Suki Matthews, and really my somatic teachers as well. Even though I didn't learn politicized somatics, my teachers did not get in the way when I started politicizing and saying we have to use it for liberation, not for better capitalism. And I just thank my teachers because they said, great, we didn't know how to do it, but we're at your back. So delighted to be here, ready to dig in, and thanks, China.
Thank you so much, Stacey. And you've touched on there's something that I'd like to delve a little bit further to in our next kind of round of questions, I suppose. And so, as you know, Stacey, and as I shared earlier, when I first started this journey in somatics, I held a lot of apprehension. And now working with Stacey often asks you to tune into how something feels in your body. And I can tell you, when I hear words like resilience and mindfulness, and my body just feels angry, right? Like concrete jaw, clenched fists. And I think my anger comes from the way that ideas like resilience and somatic sometimes more widely have been individualized and co-opted to make us all feel like we're the problem and like we can't change the world, so we should just adapt to the violence, right? And it's through conversations with Stacey, with Marai, and with Farzana that I've come to understand that what makes me and so many of us, I think, angry is this version of somatics that has no structural analysis, right? And that the way that somatics can then be used to reproduce racial capitalism. And so, Stacey, perhaps I'll come back to you first and then to Marai and Farzana, but maybe you could share some more about what you mean by embodied transformation, but when it holds structural analysis and what this looks like and feels like for you in the work that you do.
Well, I just want to join you in being very pissed off about how transformative practices totally get adapted by racial capitalism to serve racial capitalism. You know, it's kind of in some ways what has happened to so many of the queer liberation parades, when it's like, why is it a long advertisement of float after float? Anyway, so yes. So to me, behind any transformative approach has to be a goal of collective liberation. Like, we know that we live in these conditions, right? A political economy that keeps pushing us toward exploiting the earth, the air, the water, exploiting peoples, especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color, exploiting the working class, right? That it pushes toward that. And so there is no neutral, right? There's no neutral meditation. There's no neutral mindfulness. There is no neutral somatics. Either it is for the sake of structural change, right, for collective liberation, or it will be used for the conditions that we live inside of. And this just feels so essential. And so let me slow down for a second and just say, what the heck is somatics? Most people still think, you know, that I'm saying semantics, which is all good, but somatics is kind of the best word we have in English to mean that we're living, changing organisms, connected to the earth, connected to spirit, and connected to each other and the planet. We aren't minds, right? Walking around to, like, moving around to our next conversation, that soma means a living organism in its wholeness. So somatics is really the art and process of embodied transformation. Okay, and what we mean by that is, you know, both these words get used a lot right now. So one definition of transformation, if we're looking individually, is that we know we've transformed when we can relate and take actions aligned with our deepest commitments, our deepest longings, even within our current conditions, even under pressure, right? And why we say that is there's very predictable ways that the soma, the mind body, reacts when we've been traumatized, oppressed, reacts under pressure, and we can learn these and learn to work with and transform those. So that is what we mean by embodied transformation. And of course, you all know what we mean by structural transformation is that we have economies and social norms and organizations that support equity, cooperation, interdependence, liberation, right? We're going for structural transformation, yeah? The other thing I want to say about somatics that just feels important as we start to get in here is you can think about, or just maybe for the length of this program, to think about this body, this mind body, as 3 billion years of evolutionary wisdom, right? Our bodies aren't a thing. We've been trained that our bodies are objects, right? Dominion over the earth, control of the body. So much of it comes through our major religions, through our economies, yeah? But what's so amazing about 3 billion years of evolutionary wisdom is there's ways that we know how to transform, and that cultures over time have known how to transform, that are holistic. That's mostly what we're saying, holistic. And that we have inherent needs. So somatics will say that we have the inherent need for safety. We have the inherent need for belonging, right? Because we're social animals. And we have the inherent need for dignity, right? And then of course we have inherent material needs, water and healthy food and education, right? Housing. Oppression, structural oppression profoundly impacts safety, belonging, and dignity across generations. And then we have these automatic, wise survival strategies that kick in. And once they kick in, they generalize and we can't not do them. So when we go, wow, I am anxious, I'm hypervigilant, I am distrustful, right? Those are all healthy responses to oppression and trauma. And somatics lets us know how to transform those from the inside out and in how we be with each other. So we start rehearsing freedoms, right? We start being able to practice and be and learn together in a way that's both healing and liberatory. And that lets us practice our way into, right, the world we're wanting to build and organize toward. So the last thing I want to say about somatics, and hopefully this is enough to give us kind of a shared ground, is we kind of have this phrase that we use called we are what we practice. We're always practicing something. Are our practices aligned with who we want to be in the world that we want to build? And most of our default practices are inherited from our conditions, our social and political conditions, right? I mean, I am sitting just smack in the social political training of individualism. It's why here in the US, so many transformative processes lean toward individual, right? But what is a practice of interdependence that isn't just a good idea? What's a practice of generative conflict? That's not just like a good idea, but we can actually be that way with each other. How do we collectively learn how to hold complexity and contradictions without polarizing or imploding? Those are the kind of practices, right, that we're really looking at embodying collectively. Last thing is, you know, somatics starts with what do you want and what's our vision. Somatics never starts with what's wrong with us. It starts with what do we long for? What are our visions? What have we known forever that we want to pull forward? And then how do we learn to be bold together inside of those longings? Yeah. And we would say all of that is both an embodied transformation process and a process of practice. So we can, I know it sounds weird, but so that we can tolerate collective power. We can tolerate a kind of interdependence that starts to feel natural instead of having isolation feel natural. Yeah. So I hope that I spoke anywhere to your question, China, and hopefully that gives us a ground to keep getting in together.
Thank you so much, Stacey. You absolutely, you spoke to it. And I love that. I find it really powerful thinking that we're already practicing so many things, but not doing that intentionally, and that about that alignment. I found that such a powerful part of somatics so far. And Marai, I can see you nodding intensely many things that Stacey said. And I was wondering, I know that you hold some of these tensions that Stacey shared in your work, and was wondering if you'd share with us what somatics looks like in the movement building work that you do around gender justice and your work with survivors.
Thanks, China. I mean, to a certain degree, I think what I'll be saying is what it doesn't look like, because actually part of my assertion is that this is a kind of space where there isn't a lot of work taking place. So thank you, Stacey, for that grounding. I wanna ground my reflections, and I've got to have notes up on my screen because I'm perimenopausal. I forget shit. Yes. So I want to ground my reflections in the ways that colonization and capitalism have shaped our relationship with our bodies, with each other, the planet, and with life around us. So one of the tools of colonization was to teach that to be rightfully human was to exist from the neck up, right? All that thing about the mind, to prioritize one type of intellect, to disregard the body, to disregard the spirit, to disregard the wisdom of the earth. And so the ways that many colonized people, melanated folk from Africa to Oceania, from Turtle Island, aka the US, through to much of Asia, became the way that we became defined in the European imagination, suggested like a baseness where almost like inhabiting the body was rendered bestial, like animal-like. So for example, if I consider the realities of my enslaved ancestors, our bodies became defined as less human, non-human, literally work units. That's what Black folk on the plantation were, work units. And when, as my good sis Michelle Daly speaks about, you know, Black bodies were disabled through the plantation processes and plantation economy, again, this affirmation of who is disposable, right? And part of what we have to consider is that for some of us, our bodies have been defined as disposable within colonization and within capitalism. So there's almost like this bittersweet irony that so many white men are considered experts in somatics, right? So again, China, like you and like Stacey, I've got this frustration around this depoliticization of the work, because I'm like, how did you get to be here, bro? Right? Like there is that for me. But I also believe that if our liberation work is to be truly intersectional, it needs to be relational and it needs to be embodied. And like Farzana said, like we need to be getting ready, like shit is real. So how are we, if we're treating this also like, and I grew up in Jamaica, I grew up in close proximity to Cuba. I don't want to reach for military kind of references, but there is something about the training ground, right? There's something about thinking about the fact that we are in training. So if we move forward to how we show up or not in our movement spaces and in the NGO sector here, for example, I would say much of my social justice work has been in the ending violence against women and girls space. So I've been struck by how much of the work with survivors, work with human beings who have been harmed at the level of body, doesn't engage with the body, right? Really interesting thing. And many of us are survivors, for example, of violence against women, gender-based violence, disability injustice manifesting in very real ways with the ways that so many disabled folk actually experience bodily control on a day-to-day basis. Violence against our bodies as lesbians, as queer folk, as trans folk, as intersex folk. We who, as June Jordan would have, you know, lovingly rage, we who've been defined as wrong. There's a certain kind of thing, like why would we show up in our bodies? Like why, right? Our bodies are sites of harm and pain. And I don't want to kind of homogenize, but sometimes to survive, to get by, to show up day by day, we have needed to almost detach ourselves from our bodies and to some extent, sometimes from our spirits. So what I think about us as a traveling wounded, I really do. Like our movement spaces are full of traveling wounded. And I believe that some of the toxicity, and Stacey spoke about that, you know, the toxicity that we play out on each other comes from that place, the disconnect, which stops us from being in deep relationship with each other, because to connect to the body can be painful. The thing is, if we're talking about collective liberation, we're always playing catch up. And we're not at the place where we have really crafted the thing. So there's always going to be the disconnection between intention and what we're doing right now. And so my invitation to all of us is to you know, time travel. Like I define myself as a time traveler, right? So what's the future? In the future, who are we? It could be like a dystopian future of science fiction where or consciousness is removed from our bodies or emotions are policed out, or we can dream, build, fight for a future where we're fully here, right? And for me, like I owe that to my ancestors, and I owe that to like 7 generations into the future and beyond, to be in deep relationship with each other and with the planet. So for me, our liberation looks like claiming our right to a wholeness, to a full humanness, to our expansiveness. Like so many of us in the work that I do, so many of us are like existing in a space of deep numbness. And I get it. And I also want to invite us to be in training because I love us. I know what it has meant for me as a survivor of multiple forms of violence to take myself on a journey to show up in my body. And I know that it hasn't always been easy, but I also see it as a fundamental part of my accountability. I don't want to leak my shit all over people. So for me, that's also part of me being responsible. I want to know that when my body is giving me a particular message, I want to be able to tune into it. So for me, I don't want to this is all about our choice. For some folk, this work is not going to feel okay. It's not going to be the thing that is going to do the thing. But for so many of us, it could be a really beautiful entry point into a different way of working. I want us to stop doing damage to each other in our movements. I am exhausted from it. I feel like I'm out here trying to dismantle the white supremacist, ableist heteropatriarchy, and I've got to be in battle with my brother and them, with my sister and them. Like, why? I don't want that. I don't want to. So I want us to show up complete and I want us to show up like fully accountable, because I believe that we owe that to each other, and I believe that we owe that to ourselves. So like, Farzana, I'm getting a bit emotional, but that's what I want for us. So for me, this is actually about how we love. And we can't do liberation work without loving ourselves. I'm not going to get all RuPaul on you, so I'm going to shut up now. But I actually do believe if we can't do that work of loving ourselves, then how we show up in our movements is not in our fullness. And I really want us to be out here in our fullness.
Wow, Marai, all of our hearts. And I can see from the chat that your analysis is just so deeply resonating with folks. The chat is just like alive with love for you, Marai, which is just, yeah, so wonderful. And just thank you for bringing disability justice into this space and naming it. That's so important. And I know we've got another one of these sessions that will focus on disability justice. But just, yeah, thank you so much. And so finally, before we take a little break, I just wanted to invite you, Farzana, to talk to us a bit more about your kind of journey, and perhaps especially thinking about some examples of emergent practice at the intersections of somatics and health justice.
Thank you for that question. I actually just really want to stay where Staci and Marai landed us, because and maybe we can pick that up on the other side of the break. This work, you really have to be in it as an act of love. Like for me, it's a spiritual practice, and how we attend to one another. I'm also super emotional now. How we attend to each other, and how much love that is available to us that goes untapped because we don't have these tools, because we're not able to inhabit our bodies, because we've had our capacities to communicate, to be accountable, diminished, is our work. And you know, I often think, and I have seen, like or maybe give a concrete example, like right now, where I have seen those interdependent communities where we're keeping each other alive, we're keeping each other safe, we're protecting each other from state violence, raising each other's kids, participating in the revolutionary mothering, which is non-gendered, non-biological, of like preserving life and taking it towards its full thriving. That work I've seen in ends. I've seen it on estates where we know we have to buffer each other from from the state, because any connection or proximity to the state puts you in with social services, has you taken away. And so I know what we're capable of, and I know what we're capable of when we're so depleted, so under-resourced, and there's forms of distorted love. And so what also often I dream of is what would happen if we were more resourced. What would happen if we had more capacity? What would happen? What would become available to us? And I think that is the exciting bit. And also in our movements, where right now, you know, we're reproducing so many of those the dynamics that we've internalized, the conditions, as you would say, conditioned tendencies, that's structural, that then lives in our bodies, and then we enact on one another, of fear of growth, of fear of change, of fear of leadership, because we've never seen healthy leadership, we've never seen healthy power, we've never seen healthy resource allocation. None of these things have ever felt safe for us. And so as we're trying to do those things amongst ourselves, we often are turning in on one another. We often are using the exact tools of disposability, the exact tools of cancel culture, the exact tools of needing everything to be you know, woke enough, and it's not offering us enough generosity and capaciousness to be able to move together. And I think some of what the work of somatics allows us to do and supports us to do is have more generosity within ourselves amongst the complexity. And that is a skill, that is something that we have to grow. And given that in this moment we're going to have to be building fierce coalitions, fierce movements, all of that stuff is what we've got to do together. I'm committed to any strategy that helps us be amongst ourselves. And I want to kind of pause here, because I know I've gone over quite a bit for the break, and we can pick up the other side, but essentially snaps to everything Staci and Marai had said.
Can we talk about trauma for a minute? Is that okay with you all?
Yes.
Okay. To me, one of the reasons it feels so important is like we are organizing for structural change in ongoing trauma. And we, you know, I mean, Farzana, you kind of said this around, well, but like we're more powerful than what happened to us, and we're here still, right? We're here, and then how do we live the fullest lives? How do we build power together? So, you know, one of the things, and I really want to hear from you all on this, you know, somatics so helps us understand that we have these very wise responses to being harmed, right? Fight, flight, freeze, appease, dissociate, right? Those are ways that we can categorize it. There's different ways, but that is a deep impulse from this 3 billion years, right, of wisdom living in our bodies, this deep impulse to have us try to take care of surviving, of safety, belonging, and dignity. But as they become habits, right, inside of our somas, and then how we relate to each other, to me, it's one of the places, like, one, we so deserve healing collectively. We so deserve to have the capacity for joy, the capacity for trust, the capacity to take risks and change rather than holding on or positioning, right? And it comes into our organizing, it comes into our movement building so much in, as we've been talking about, how we can both treat each other or appease to things that we don't want to appease to anymore. So I think I just want to bring that in, because it's like, and Marai, you said this, it's like in how do I want to say this? It is painful to come back into our bodies. I don't know how it's not. It's like, because we start feeling what is and what was over generations. And then also what blows me away is in our bodies is this capacity to transform and to grow and to unwind things that have been holding us for long periods of time. And then it almost emanates with and to each other, so we can lift each other up that way too. So I will start with that. And what do y'all want to throw in?
Tracy, thank you for that. I think that the tension, that thing about the pain of coming back into our bodies, and also, and this speaks to, you know, kind of China's first comment around the lack of, like, we should just, you know, that thing, like we should just adapt, right? And I think part of what I know for me had me not cynical, but like holding a certain distance from particular work was, if I'm going to come back into my body, risk coming back into my body in spaces with folk that are trying to tell me that the thing that I should be doing is adapt, right? While at the same time being subjected to racism, being subject to, do you like, it's that. And so I think there's also, along with the beauty and the way that I know I experience myself building muscle in terms of being in my body, I also know that part of the thing that worried me was, what was I like, you know, like I because I was tuning out to get through, you know, like just like I would be going, like traveling through London and in a state of hypervigilance, which I still rely on, right? And I think that there's also something about, maybe we could speak to that, like because this isn't like this wholesale removal of our survival mechanisms, which come from that 3 billion years of knowing, right? And so how do we, like, maybe for folk who aren't in any of the practices, like maybe we could speak to the fact that this is not a denial of that, right? It's not a, like, we're not kind of saying, we're not trying to dispose of what our body, what our amygdala is kind of going, yeah, danger. We're not trying to say this is it, this is that. And so I think for me at first that was a point of worry. And I think so it might be good to hear, like, we're still in these places of being, spaces of being harmed. Turn on the television, move down the street. Some of us can't leave our homes. We're in, you know, we're dealing with all of that. How do we then talk about liberation and being in our bodies when we're dealing with that stuff, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that when we do this type of trauma work, it's not to make us adaptive to oppression. We really hope that that's like landing for everyone. What we're actually trying to discover is whether our adaptive mechanisms are appropriate, and can we have a different strategy in place? Can we offer ourselves a different response? And when we're thinking, especially in the context of abolition, where we want to have different choices in conflict, different choices in organizing, and different choices of being with one another, that agency that then becomes collective freedoms is the thing that we're trying to generate within ourselves. And I think, you know, I sometimes joke that I'm a professional, I was recovering disassociator. And what we mean, I guess, or with disassociation is really the kind of processes and strategies we use to kind of split or shrink or compartmentalize, because our reality or the environment that we're in, it's not possible to experience or tolerate. And, you know, that's the world that we're living in. And one of the techniques that we'd explored blending with Staci, it was a really profound moment, because I'm firstly a double Aquarius. I'm already always here, but also through my survivorhood, being someone where my body hasn't been safe to inhabit and sometimes still isn't. And being able to look at that and feel into that survival mechanism and hold it and love it and say, thank you for keeping me alive. Today, I don't need you. In this moment, I don't need you. Like, we're good. We've got this. And, you know, having this really nurturing relationship that isn't trying to re-stigmatize or shame or the ways in which we're navigating the world. And also inviting myself to more agency, or inviting us to more agency, saying, is this the most appropriate response I can have? And what I also think is really powerful to when we are working with trauma in this deeply embodied way, is that we often forget the other exciting things that happen when we're, you know, regulated or settled, like our curiosity, our creativity. Like I feel music in my body, like I always feel music in my body, and I love that. I love feeling music in my body. I'm a writer, so I hear words in my body, and that's more and more audible. Intuition, creativity, being curious, being able to take risks, being able to be vulnerable. And I think a pivot that I often like to make is that we're not always recovering. Sometimes we're just uncovering, and that's fun. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that in as well.
Sana, can I say something? Thank you for that. Because there's also the thing about the our bodies as sites of pleasure, right? And joy. And I think that for me, like I feel that the joy in my body has turned up. Like for the Jamaicans in the Oast, Lee, I know you're there, the thing turn up, right? Like that thing of just being more deeply present, right? My Caribbean folk will be like up, yeah. This for me is part of the gifts, a part of, or one of the gifts of this work, right? Like body, pleasure, joy in body. I love the fact that you're hearing music. For me, I'm like, yeah, the dancehall music, I'm feeling it at a different level right now, you know? Yeah, so thank you for that, Farzana.
That's beautiful. Thanks, Marai, and also Farzana. I want to speak to a couple of things. This piece about, like, in some ways, what we're trying to do is how do we have more embodied choices and responsiveness rather than a more automatic reactiveness that shuts down our options and our agency. And I mean, you know, in some ways, why I've stayed in this for 30 years is both because it starts with that vision, like, what do you long for? What do you care about? And that is to know the answer to that question is such a bodily response. And then also, like you said, Farzana, how we survived is not bad. How we survived works, because we are here trying to navigate this world still and caring about others. And honoring those survival strategies. It's like, well, how does that live in me? How does it get kicked off in me? What does it need now? Right? Softening, almost like befriending ourselves again, instead of being so deeply at odds and trying to overmanage ourselves or all the things that we try to do. That deep befriending of getting to come back into something that's already whole. And, you know, this like, back in our bodies, 2% is plenty. And then sometimes, like, let's come back into our aliveness. I don't know, now it's like, okay, today 65% is fine because I'm in better, safer conditions. But that range of options, and that we don't lose our survival strategies. I mean, mine kick in awesome. You know, my little combo of appease and then fight, you know, it's like I look real nice until you push me too far. Then you better watch out what pops out, right? But that those don't get taken away. It's like building more options that become practices and ways of being and embodiments that are more and more aligned with what we deeply care about. Yeah. I want to say one thing about whiteness. You know, one of the lies of whiteness and about white supremacy is that white people are safer, more belonged, and more dignified through oppressing other people. It is a total embodied lie of whiteness. And, you know, even when we're working from positions of privilege in the places that we sit in those, that unpacking and going, no, oppression is not safety in locations of privilege. That is a lie. It's an embodied lie. How do we unpack that and transform that to go, being a part of the circle, fighting for life is the place that we're safest. But that has to happen viscerally, right? Not just at the level of an idea, to actually align and be in solidarity and alliance with each other.
Thank you all three so much. And I mean, I think maybe you can see, or maybe you've been occupied, but there is just so much in the chat, giving like love and also just some questions, and I think ways that this is really resonating with people, and lots of curiosity. So maybe now would be a good time to kind of gently go into the Q&A, but just giving us plenty of time to expand on that and continue the discussion, kind of informed by some of these questions. So there's still time to post a question or a comment in the chat if you would like to. So please keep doing that, and Sarah and I'll try and keep an eye on that. So I'm not doing this in any particular order, but just kind of going, because I feel like this really speaks to what we've just been talking about. I'll go to Bindu's question first, and I'm going to read out the questions. So Bindu says that this is so much of what we've been talking about, and particularly to Marai, is something that Bindu struggles with so much as a severely disabled born and neurodivergent brown woman of the diaspora and multiple survivor currently battling homelessness. It's difficult to remain in the body, and Bindu talks about using a lot of practices to try to keep themselves alive. But it's hard to simultaneously take in practices as we and our bodies are being violated and subjected to harm and violence. So Bindu's question is, how do we embody these practices in such harmful times? Don't know if any, Marai, maybe, I don't know if you would like to speak to that first.
I was hoping Stacey would come in. So Bindu, just love and solidarity first of all. I don't know. I don't know. I've got a clear, strong answer to this, because I think that I feel like this is something that many of us in different ways are grappling with. The thing of, like, it's a thing that Farzana said, like, it's not about adapting to the kind of the oppression and so forth. But I also feel, just based on like my own journey, that those, like, the practices help to keep me together. And at the same time, all of the shit is coming at me, right? And so for me, although I want to use the practices for the expansion and all of those things on a very practical level, and I do, on a very practical level, I'm also drawing on those practices to keep myself safe inside me, if that makes sense. So I don't know that that's necessarily that helpful, because I don't feel like this is like, I don't feel like I'm deep enough in the practice to provide you with like but I can only say, for me, the work is, what do I need to attend to on a day-to-day basis? How do I, knowing full well that folk or like society isn't designed to take care of me, what are the ways that I can, where possible, care for myself, right? And that's going to be like different for each human, depending on your material realities, on what's happening in your body, all of those things. So yeah, I think it's an area of discomfort and tension for me as well. Stacey, maybe you could support, Farzana, maybe you could support around that, because like, I feel like many of us are trying to figure this out as well.
I might quickly come in before Stacey, I think you could more speak to, with your expertise on the practices. When I have been in, also just a lot of love to you, Bindu, and probably so many of us on the call who are navigating this entrapment of cumulative violence and slow violences. This is why the structural justice piece is important. Sometimes it's not. I remember actually NCHEM and DEFO, I was navigating lots of complex, difficult things. And I was like, okay, what practice will I put in so I can like survive this moment? And she said, how about pause? And I was like, I'll just surrender to this moment. And she was like, no, like, just how about pause? And in the pause, if you can get your body comfort, if you can just get it to comfort, then it will generate what the next step is. And I couldn't even see the next step. And so I think, given that we know all of us are increasingly and are surviving all of these forms of oppressions, the structural capacity needs to be built, and for us to know what that is and become an ecosystem that can provide that collective response. So when one of us is down, we can have a community first response, that we can support each other, and, you know, using tools like co-regulation and other things. We won't all be as well as possible at the same time, but if we can grow more of us on the ground, more of us creating the material conditions, fighting for the material conditions, as well as growing those skill sets in our communities, then when we are navigating these difficult things, we'll know how to attend and we'll know how to support one another. And I think that's the bit I would add in, and I'll pass over to
Thank you, Farzana and Marai, and Bindu. Also, thank you so much for just bringing this, and also just a lot of love and solidarity to you. The first thing I want to say is like, and you weren't saying this, Bindu, but I want to say it because it's just such a default way of thinking of like, practice isn't the magic pill, right? It's not a magic pill. It's like we are on a big road of transformation for the rest of our lives. That's how I hold it, right? Individual and collective transformation for the rest of our lives. Inside of that, what is life affirming for us to be practicing on purpose right now? And, you know, the first place I like to go is what's already working. Like for everyone here, what are you already practicing that brings you more life, or that brings you more of a sense of the kind of connection that you want, or that brings you a quality of fierceness that feels really life affirming or joy? So the first of like, what are you already practicing? And just do that a little bit more, right? Just turn that up a little bit more. You know, I really dislike kind of what a trend is right now of like, you know, if you do these 8 practices, your life will change. That stuff drives me crazy. It's like, no, that is capitalism speaking again. So what already works? How do you turn that up a little? And then the next thing to me is like, how do we practice with each other? Even if it's one comrade and it's one friend. And, you know, I was talking with a good friend of mine, Donna, the other night, and, you know, her son's having a struggle. I was talking about some of my struggles, and we're like, let's just take 5 minutes and let's just practice giving and receiving care. That was it. Got in our bodies. I beamed a little love. She took it in. She beamed some love. I took it in. Just practicing together in these small chunks can be so nourishing. So practices aren't a fix. We're already doing things that really, really work. How do we do them more on purpose or more regularly? And then how do we practice with each other really in small bits that feel nourishing, life affirming? Yeah. And I also want to acknowledge, it's just like one of the tensions to me is like this place of innovation that really needs to happen is happening and needs to keep happening around disability justice and somatics is essential. And someone else earlier on the chat, and I'm sorry, it's too far back now, but you know, I've worked a lot with trans BIPOC folks going, this is hella complex coming into this body. This body has been a site of so many things. And it's like the self-defining that can come in, the agency that can come in and going, how do I want to be in and occupy my soma, right? How do I want to be embodied in a way that's resonant or congruent for me, even if it's in these small moments in small spaces, feels essential in a liberatory somatics.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you, Bindu, for what you shared and what came to be shared after that. So there's so many questions coming in, and totally keep them coming. And I'm going to try and maybe bring a few of those questions together, because some of them kind of touch on some of the same things. They resonate with each other, even though they're distinct. And I'm going to read out 2 questions, and I'm going to read them out in full because they just give a little bit of context, I think, which is important to why that question is maybe being asked. And so one of these is anonymous and says, I'm fed up of middle-class white men taking a monopoly on trauma. I'm a white woman, grew up working class and a survivor of child sex abuse. I've worked for 10 years with marginalised young people who've been exploited. What I find difficult is that well-being is like a privilege when you are surviving every day on the streets. How can we help somatics healing be accessible for all? And related to, but different from that, just really powerful question. And thank you so much to the person that asked that and for sharing that. There's a question from Eliza, which I think resonates with this. And Eliza says, the word somatics and indeed even trauma is thrown around so much these days. And there's so much good, I'm sure, in that. But as Marai says, it can make people cynical or feel excluded because it's just more language to learn and it can feel like a barrier to participating. So how do we start to practice these things? What are simple ways we can show rather than tell the benefits of embodiment? So these are questions about access and about showing those benefits. Thank you so much for those two questions. And Farzana, Marai or Stacey, I'll hand over to you.
I can maybe briefly kick us off. Those are great questions, and those are the exact questions why we're having this event and the next event, and precisely around access, precisely about who gets to, monopolize on the conversations, precisely about language, in and of itself isn't liberation, and how can we, be visible? How can, everyone on this panel is with lived experience who can share with you skepticism, can share with you cynicism, and also what we're grappling with, like those things are not unresolved. And so I do want to share with you that part of our commitment at Healing Justice London, but also I know the commitments of Marai and Stacey working with us and also separately, is to make these things accessible, to make them democratic, and for us to engage more with one another. Some of that is concrete in terms of like, yes, there is matters of resourcing, like to be able to do something like this and make it accessible. We need our rich allies, we need our funders to put the money in so that we can democratize essentially matters of public health. These things are matters of public health, and they're part of our dignity. They're part of, being able to survive. And so I think the work of politicizing this work, connecting it with our public health, but also having more of us name this in what language is available to us. Like, so often we're saying the same thing. And what I also do want to say and reflect is that I agree, language definitely can and is sometimes a barrier, but we're so competent as communities and people, and we don't all, sometimes we generate new language to help us travel to a new destination, a new set of conditions. So I think I also want to invite us to play with language, to explore language, let it help us travel a little bit till we find something else that is a more appropriate fit. And we don't need to infantilize our communities around it. And I loved the second point because it was like showing, like, I know that actually when I'm working on estates, we're doing abolition work. We don't necessarily call it abolition. And so, but sometimes we'll bring it in so that we're doing that connective work. So we're actually creating more shared language across different spaces. And that's all of our work. Like often we do these panels and it's like the people on the panel might have that answer, and we're inviting you back into the conversation to do it with us. Show us how, ask the questions with us, put your hands in with us, and let's try and shape it together.
Marai, go for it. I'll go after you.
Thanks, Stacey. I think again, just to honor some words from Nkem Ndefo, I was reading something of hers a while back where she talked about every exchange being an opportunity to change culture. And I think there's something around the work of Healing Justice London and the work of, like folk out there who are focusing in this way. But I also think part of the democratization is each moment, each exchange that we have like what are we sharing with folk, what are we offering, what are we learning? Because I also feel like it's not like this linear thing of, okay, just about, you know, like quote unquote, like the experts, like that's just more of the thing. And I'm not like this, and I'm not saying it to deny like the very real time and energy it takes to develop expertise in terms of like particular practices. It's not a diminishment of that, but it's also something about the way the work also evolves, which is, as Farzana said, like in exchange, in sharing. And actually sometimes there is like the formal thing. And the reason I started in the way that I did, to acknowledge the dancers and the healers and the medicine folk and all of those things, is there are loads of people out there that are doing work that it is focused on supporting us to be in our bodies that might not define their work in a particular way. And I want to honor all of what that is, because that's also part of the richness of who we are as human beings. I know, like I think about, you know, some of my sisters and brethren that are on this very call right now, who the work that they're doing at community. I think about Lee in Jamaica. I think about the work that Gendia does, you know, like the body work. Like I think about all of those things, and I'm like, people are naming their work differently, and also creating space and supporting with healing practices. So I just want to offer that as a kind of another holding for us.
And can I just quickly say one thing, Stacey? That's also why we're called Healing Justice London, because it's a framework. Healing Justice is a framework. We didn't invent it. We sit in a continuum. And I think for us, those two things were the two things we wanted to work with, whilst creating capacities for transformation. So I just want to say that we also know very explicitly our work is to gather with one another and expand out that continuum, and when it's appropriate, and when it's not, we offer grace.
Thank you both, and thanks for the questions. I just want to tell a story. There's I'm in Oakland, California. And it took about 10 years of youth organizing to get the funds passed to start a youth center, a youth organizing center in a southern part of Oakland that is highly under-resourced and over-policed and under-resourced. And some of the folks who were in the beginning team were also training in somatics. And so we kept going, how do we bring this framework into and have it be informed by the youth? And we ended up running, I mean, you might call it a leadership development program, right? But it was all a somatic leadership development program, where the first round of folks who went through were like, what would you call this? How would you practice this? What would it look like for you and the folks that you're with, right? And it was amazing, because it's like, okay, practices can be anything that helps build in us more choices and more alignment with our politics, our love, right? All of that. And it was amazing. And also, I mean, Farzana, you're pointing to this too, but folks have so much creativity and power. And there's a way that, like, with all the very popularized trauma language, it's another way of just being like, oh, well, because these people are experiencing this thing, whether it's based on class or race or sexual orientation, and trauma becomes the only definition, instead of the utter creativity of what's already happening and living, surviving, and connecting. So I just wanted to speak to like how adaptive this can be, and that, you know, and created in the most relevant way by the people practicing it within their context. So it's also just so important. It's not something rigid. It's principles and practices and ways to adapt what actually serves people in specific contexts, and also serves liberation. Yeah.
And just to come in here, you've all talked so much about about practices, right, and tools. And I think we've had some really beautiful examples, but there's also quite a lot of questions in the chat where people are asking in different ways for, you know, to know a little bit more, I guess, a little bit unpacking of some of the somatic tools that folks are down to share, or tools that have been particularly powerful in any specific organising and support, and also just any link to that, any sharing of spaces or cool groups and projects which are relevant to this. So if you've, in the last kind of 5 minutes before we go into a practice, it might be a nice time to just share some practices and talk about some examples if anyone would like to start off.
I can toss in real quick. You know, we worked for about 6 years with the National Domestic Workers Alliance. So in the history of the US, when labor rights were won in the 40s, domestic workers and field workers, because of the history of slavery in this country, were not given labor rights. So we are still, domestic workers are still winning labor rights state by state by state, right? And you all know Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez with farm workers' rights. What was so amazing getting to work over all that time with domestic worker organizers and member leaders was really getting to go the whole range of, like what we've been talking about today, building what we call somatic awareness so we can feel ourselves more and work with what we're feeling and be with what each other are feeling instead of getting super reactive to it. That we could be in collective practice together. And it was practices all the way from like, how do we all relearn consent? How do we like make direct requests of each other? How do we say no and be able to hear no? How do we vision not only a year, but 5 years, but 200 years into the future and bring our energy out into that vision? These were all practices that we were doing collectively. And then something that I want to share that just to me is, I mean, it's one of my best members of our work with them, is these are all, you know, 99% cis women, 100% survivors of violence, migration and immigration trauma, poverty trauma, so many experiences. And there was a whole weekend focused on what we call somatic opening, which is this deep way of being held so that some of those wounds and hurts can come to the surface and be held in a loving context. And one of the ways we do that is somatic body work. And everyone like pulled, we were at like a Girl Scout center in Washington, DC with like 100 of us, and folks brought down their bedspreads and their pillows to lie on, and then literally got to do somatic body work on each other and hold space and hold healing space peer to peer with each other, while, you know, a group of us got to hold the broader container. But so many of those women said, you know, I remember this from my grandma. I remember this from my great grandma. I'm so glad I get to hold space for this person. And then so many said, no one's ever held space for me like that before, right? That's what I want to see all of us get to be able to do in our movement spaces with each other.
Thank you so much, Stacey. Sorry, Farzana, I was just going to say we've got so many beautiful, brilliant questions coming in, but we're going to have to start to close this. So, but we'll be able to keep a record of the chat and the questions, and hopefully return to some of that, share some resources after the session, because really beautiful questions that are desperate to read out, but we haven't got time. So just in terms of closing, just before we go into a practice, I wondered if Farzana, Marai or Stacey, you've got any closing remarks that might speak to practice or to anything broader that's come up for you in this session today. Farzana, did you want to?
Just purely practical, this is the work that we want to do in the UK. So, you know, completely putting it on the table that we want to resource this work over the next 10 years. We want to build that community response. We want to be able to grow that capacity in our communities. So we're calling in resourcing, you know, to be able to do that. What we hope over the next 10 years, working with Stacey and other folks, and particularly movement leaders and folks who are, you know, really driving change on the ground to be able to be skilled and trained in some of this work. And, you know, I know, Stacey, you'll appreciate me saying, and recontextualizing the work, making the work better and more appropriate, because it's not fixed. This is the work that we shape together, and without diminishing expertise and skill. And so that's the stuff that you hopefully get to see us at Healing Justice do around somatics and abolition, and really trying to fundraise to resource more of our movements and more of our folks on the ground to be able to train and get the technical skill, as well as doing the more broader political education. You know, that's our commitment. That's the stuff that we are really hoping to do, build transparency and yeah, skills in our communities to be able to do it. I will pause there and pass to Marai.
Thanks, sis. I guess for me, the work is really about my Black and global majority kind of community organizers, folk who oftentimes don't have a particular kind of access. And so, you know, one of the things that I'd like us to do, and this is why I love Healing Justice London, is really like, you know, I love Stacey's white, you know, like we want to have Black folk in the space holding this work, you know, global majority melanated folk in this space on these islands here holding the work, so that the sacredness of those spaces can also be curated, particularly when, you know, some of us are in like those moments of responding to racial harm, responding to racism and so forth. So like that for me, I want all of us to become more connected, more embodied, because I also think it will just help to change shit on the planet. But like I also, that the healing aspect of this, like for my people, I'm like, I want that. So that's also like the thing for me that I'm really holding on to right now.
Thank you both, Marai and Farzana, so much. And Stacey, maybe now is a great time if folks want to move into a final closing practice, so we can kind of do a little bit of what we've been talking about, if that feels okay with you.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And Marai, what you just said, it just, yes. Okay, for anybody who wants to, we're going to do a centering practice. And inside of every practice, like when we practice on purpose, it's like there's a principle that we're practicing embodying. And what we're practicing inside of centering is how to be present, open, connected, and on purpose. So that means like connected to what we care about or connected to our purpose. That's what we're practicing embodying. And I think a lot of like this, some centering practices or grounding practices that are out there are kind of about like calming down. That isn't what centering is about. We could be centered and angry. We could be centered and like enlivened, right? We could be centered and peaceful. It just is that we're present, we're in ourselves with each other and connected to what we care about. So if you'd like to practice with us, feel free to just check in with yourself. You can do this practice standing or seated, and we're mixing up what we're doing on our with Farzana, Marai, and I'm going to do it seated. And also, if at any point it's like, woo, that's a little bit too much sensation or a little bit too much in my body, it's fine to turn it down. You know, I always think of I'm you know, placing myself in time, but the old stereo knobs, you could like turn up and turn down. We can do that with our sensations too. So if it's too much, just do less. It's fine. Or if you want a little bit more aliveness, you can imagine turning it up. So anyone who wants to practice, go ahead and find yourself seated or find yourself standing. You can lie down too if you want. And then we're going to start to move from our thinking into our sensing and our feeling. So that means you can kind of start to pay attention to what are temperatures that you feel. Maybe there's places you feel warmer, places you feel cooler right now. In sensing, we can also just feel for places that maybe we feel more relaxed right now, or places we feel more tense or more numb. All of that is fine. We just want to make space, right, for whatever's happening inside of us. Keep moving from your thinking into your sensing and feeling. And as you do that, start to drop your attention deeper into your body. Our heads are our bodies too, but just drop it deeper into your body, like below your chin if you can. And then maybe you also might notice movement, like tingling or streaming or pulsing. All of those are sensations. It's like this foundational language of the body is sensation. And then drop your attention down to your belly. So if it helps to put a hand just below your belly button, you can do that. Start to bring your attention, your breath down to your belly, and we're going to call this center. It's like deep in the middle of us. And then what this practice does is we center in 4 directions. So we're first going to center in length. And that means like dropping down into the lower part of your body. Maybe you find more weight in your hips, right? We're all operating in gravity. And how do we not fight gravity? How do we like be in gravity and let gravity kind of have us? Maybe it means that you can feel or bring more attention to something in your lower body or your feet. Coming more into your lower body, settling into our lower bodies, while at the same time we lengthen in our upper bodies. I think of all of these directions as a way to counter oppression. Yeah, it's we get to come into our full length and practice being in our full selves. Whether you want to do that like 4% right now or 95%, whatever works for you is fine. But centering in our length, balancing bottom and top, and coming into our full length, whatever ours is. And inside of centering in length, we also say we're practicing centering in dignity, right? The dignity of all life, including you. Yeah, exploring that, experimenting with like, wow, if I practice centering in dignity, what would that feel like? Relaxed, open worthiness. All right, second direction, width. So from all that length, widen out left and right across your collarbones. Maybe the next couple of breaths you take, you widen out your ribs side to side. Can again widen into your hips. If it helps to touch your hips, you can do that if that works for you. Widening your feet. All right, so expanding out left and right, it's almost going from being more tucked in, which we often have to do given our conditions, to widening, unfurling, opening to the sides of our bodies and beyond. We think about width as interdependence or connection, letting ourselves out to who we choose to and letting the people we want in, let them in. So widening, and feel that in your body. So it's not just a concept, it's in our tissues. It's visceral. We're widening back into connection. Yeah. And with each other on this call. Balancing left and right, centering in width. All right, third direction is depth. Backside, inside, front side. And let's pay attention at first to the space behind us and our back bodies. Yeah, maybe you can feel the space at the back of your heart. Maybe you can feel the space at the back of your thighs. Maybe you can feel the back of your head or your heels. All right, this whole back body, feeling, sensing. And then really what's behind us, so many movements for liberation are at our backs. Ancestors at our backs. All of our lived experiences at our backs. We can just open to that space, that 3 billion years of evolutionary wisdom at our back. Yeah, that back side opening up and even resting back if that feels right to you. And then coming to our deep internal space, this depth. Yeah, this depth where we find ourselves, where we can cultivate our own depth. Yeah, our heartbeats, our organs. Yeah, that dark inner space that is so much life. See if you can make just 1 or 2% more room in your depth for life and for you. Coming all the way to your front body, maybe you feel your chin or the front of your chest or the tops of your thighs, right? The front facing into the future, facing into our visions and commitments, right? Facing also into the unknown. Yeah. How do we be connected to history in our moment in history deeply and facing into the future and the unknown? That is depth, balancing and centering in depth. And then bringing that all together, centered in length and dignity, centered in width, interdependence, centered in depth, right? The depth of time, our moment in history. Yeah, and then the last thing, the fourth direction, is we center on who and what we love, what our calling or purpose is. And we know that so deeply in ourselves. And even if you're in one of those moments in your life where you're like, I don't know, it's fine. You can also not know and just feel what you care about, feel purpose, and let that fill out your whole soma. Let it fill out your whole nervous system, that calling or who you love. It's like it can fill out all of our tissues. We practice centering on purpose over and over again so it can guide our conversations, it can guide our choices, it can guide our actions and how we love each other. And then just to finish, if your eyes are closed, you can keep them closed. If you want to open them, you can. But just let yourself feel out for a moment to these 178 people practicing centering and being on purpose together. We're not alone in this. Now we're learning together, we're practicing together. What is it like to just expand out and go, wow, we're practicing together, we're connecting to purpose and love together. Thank you. Thank you for practicing together.
Thank you so much, Stacey. That was just beautiful. And the whole session has been so powerful. Thank you all so much. And I don't know about everyone else, but I feel like I've spent so long in a place of critique and diagnosing what's wrong that our muscles and my muscles for imagining better worlds need strengthening. So it becomes so hard in the world that we currently live in to even imagine as for name what we long for. And it seems that somatics is a way of practicing and rehearsing the worlds we want to live in, those life-sustaining conditions that we long for, and give us the tools to practice together across our different struggles. So I'm just so grateful for all of your just beautiful, powerful words today. And I just wanted to say to people, we can collect together the resources from the chat and share them after this session. All of our events are free, and so if you can help us to keep them that way and mean that we don't have to rely only on funders, please donate if you can. And please sign up to our newsletter if you haven't already. And just thanks so much for joining us, all of you, to our wonderful speakers, our BSL interpreters, our incredible tech team, especially Sarah Al-Sarraj, and our broader HJL team, and Alex and Sarah especially tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us and being here together in this moment. Sending love and solidarity.